Hello students, let us continue our discussion on the Whitsun weddings by Philip Larkin. In my last lecture, I have completed the first section, that is the from line number 1 to 10 of this particular poem, and there I have mentioned about the particular kind of committing of the journey that is taken place from Hull to London. So the description actually began in the previous stanza, and we have found that from how Larkin is describing that the journey is being committed from a particular town to the landscaping details. Now it begins in this particular fashion. All afternoon, through the tall heat that slept for miles inland, a slow and stopping curve southwards we kept. So generally, the particular kind of a description that I have mentioned, it actually continued in this particular fashion. It says, all afternoon through the tall heat. Now, such kind of description, such kind of use of epithets, these are not very common in the formal writing by any other poets. You see, here it has been written that all afternoon through the tall heat. Now, the question suddenly arises, why or how the heat can become tall? And here it says, all afternoon through the tall heat that slept for miles inland. So here you will find a figure of speech personification is being incorporated. Here Larkin says, through the tall heat that slept for miles inland, a slow and stopping curve southwards we kept. Actually, literally, it is describing the particular kind of the curve of the rails, you see, as it is a fundamental description of the train journey. So therefore, you will find the similar kind of descriptions have been made. A slow and stopping curve. You see that whenever you are within a train, ultimately you can find that the speed of the train, it varies from time to time. And it says, a slow and stopping curve southwards we kept. And what happens there? White farms went by, short-shadowed cattle, and canals with floatings of industrial froth. Now you can find that somehow throughout this particular poem, there is a gradual form of bifurcation, a kind of difference is being maintained by Philip Larkin. The bifurcation or the differentiation between the cities and the rural backdrop, that is the villages. You will find that somehow in the previous stanza, the town or the city and the descriptions of the cities and maybe the descriptions of the sceneries that can be associated with the cities, these have been mentioned. And now here you will find as it is related to the landscapes. So therefore you will find the wide farms are being described. Short-shadowed cattle are being described. Why? Because you will find that it is noon. And when the time noon comes, you see that the sun is just above our head and the shadows are short-shadowed. So kettles are there and canals with floatings of industrial froth. Now, you cannot say that the industries are the byproduct of the rural setup. Rather, we have to mention that the industries are actually the products of the typical urban culture. That is the society that has been associated with particular form of materialism. So industries are the byproduct of the cities, and you will find that the floatings of industrial froth, that is the discharge part, that is actually polluting the villages, or maybe the descriptions of the villages that have been contemplated here. So here you will find white farms went by, short-shadowed cattle, and canals with floatings of industrial froth. So a particular kind of pollution is being pointed out, a particular kind of, say, exploitation is being hinted at. A hothouse flashed uniquely. What is a hothouse? Hothouse, probably you have heard of the term greenhouse. Yes, a particular house that have been created by or with the help of glass. And why it is flashing uniquely? just because you will find that the sun rays are being reflected from these glass houses. So it is flashed uniquely. And what happens? The description, the typical descriptive notion of this particular poem continues. It says, hedges dipped and rose. What happens, that when you are within a train and you are looking from the window, that is the open window, there you will find that it seems as if the shrubs that are just beside the rail line, you can find that it seems as if it is dipped and rose. Okay, such kind of impetus is being given here. A hothouse flashed uniquely, hedges dipped and rose, and now and then a smell of grass displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth until the next town, new and nondescript, approached with acres of dismantled cars. So here you will find again, as I have mentioned in my previous lecture, that when Philip Larkin was mentioning the reference to the fish dock, there was a certain kind of olfactory images being incorporated. Now here you will find that another olfactory image is being created. And what is that? The smell of grass. And here you will find that, as I mentioned, that repeatedly Larkin is using some kind of rhetorical devices, that is the figures of speech. And here the figure of speech is personification. And you will find that the reek of buttoned carriage cloth. Do you not find that here Philip Larkin is using a certain kind of, that cloth imagery? Yes, it has been used. Say for example, when you are within the carriage of the train, what happens, that it seems to be a reeking smell that is there. In Bengali, it is called bhapsha gandho. The similar kind of thing, you see that when the house is closed for a long time and when you enter after that, you will find a particular kind of reeking smell is there. Similarly, you will find the same reeking smell within our body. That means that the odor, the body odor that is coming from, it's a reeking smell that is coming from the buttoned cloth, you see. The similar kind of incorporation is being made by Philip Larkin. What happens, now and then a gust of wind is coming from outside and it gives you a kind of, say, oxygenated air to some extent. So that's why he says, and now and then a smell of grass displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth. It happens. That is the typical sensation that the poet is actually feeling or experiencing. He says, it happens or it continues until the next town. Why? Because you will find that it is the name of this particular, or the title of this particular poem is Whitsun Weddings. So there must be something that has to be attached with the concept of wedding. And you will find that the newly married couple or a group of couples, they will come one by one. Certainly, it will happen in the next town. So that's why here he says, it displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth until the next town. It is new, it is nondescript, and then why it is nondescript? Because you don't want to know about the town. It is completely nondescript. There is nothing serious here. It approached with the acres of dismantled cars. Now the question certainly arises that why does Philip Larkin refer to this kind of images? You will find the acres of dismantled cars. Now in India, you cannot find these kinds of things are there because the scrapped or maybe the dismantled cars are there. Okay? Because it is completely being cut and broken, and maybe the parts of the bodies of these cars have been sold or resold there. Ultimately, that when you enter or when you go to the western parts of the globe, ultimately you will find that there are some places where the cars have been dismantled there. That is, the parts have been there. It has been completely been broken, and one by one above one or one upon one, the cars have been stored. That actually, or these kinds of garages, these kinds of places are generally found at the outskirts of the town. It actually indicates that the actual town is coming. You see, why such a kind of description is being made here? Do you not think that ultimately with the particular description of the acres of dismantled car image, Philip Larkin is indicating towards the post-World War, say, fragmentation, a particular kind of life that we are suffering from? I will describe that when I will read T.S. Eliot with you. Then I will mention the pattern of life that we are leading, living and partly living, that Eliot mentions in Murder in the Cathedral. Similarly, you will find the typical post-war anxiety, typical post-war frustration, typical post-war fragmentation. That particular thing, it becomes the crux of one's life. When we read Philip Larkin, when we read movement poetry, you will find the fundamental focus of the poet. It is not simply to describe something. Rather, you will find, with the help of the images, with the help of certain symbols, the poet is indicating towards something problematic. Rather, we should say that he is problematizing our lives. These are not so simple that we are thinking at this moment. The typical complexity, the typical forms of problems that we are facing, all these things have to be treated with greater aims and greater focus. Larkin is indicating that. Not he is directly mentioning them and describing them and showing the alternative way as Eliot did. But ultimately, we will find that in the typical post-World War scenario, Larkin is indicating those particular, say, problems of the society with the help of his images and symbols in a slanting way, or rather slant way. Okay? How these have been indicated, we will continue in our next lecture. Stay attached and listen to the next lectures. Thank you.